Hello guys, and welcome back to this new episode and to our channel. Today we are going to talk about superpowers, not in a corny way, but in a real actual way. There are in fact some populations that have specific superpowers. Have you ever wondered if superpowers actually exist? Well, the answer is yes. As I was saying in the introduction, superpowers do exist and some populations, some people have certain superpowers. I'm not talking about psychic sort of superpowers because they are not scientifically proved, which doesn't mean necessarily that they don't exist, but that we cannot generalize that to a population, we cannot explain it from a scientific standpoint, so we are going to ignore it, at least for this video. What we are to focus on instead is certain real superpowers. What do I mean? Well, let's start immediately. For instance, Australian Aborigines have a super sight. What do I mean by that? Well, they are endowed naturally with a lot of very positive, very good skills. For instance, their body is able to regulate the temperature in a much better way than what we are able to do. For instance, it has been proven that Australian Aborigines are able to adapt to a night in which you have like 0 degrees much better than an average Australian. And so what that means is that they do possess skills that are natural in that they are just, the result of evolution probably. But that's not what we're going to talk about. The very powerful skill that they do have, about which we don't know, I think, enough, is their super sight. What do I mean? They're able to see 4 times better than an average other person. 4 to 5 times better. And that's incredible. And we don't have an explanation. I mean, probably the explanation is, as I was saying, in evolution. Because of their lifestyles, they might be able to see better. But like 4 to 5 times better, it's quite a lot. And it is exactly for that reason that some of them were and are still being employed by the army in the unit called North Force. So basically the army enrolls them to check which illegal boat is in the Australian waters, because their sight is so precise and so they can see very well, very far from where they are, which I thought was incredible, and especially because we don't have an explanation like how that has developed and how that has not impacted us. And it's probably the fact that those are tribes that remain quite isolated, do not mix so much with other people, and that's probably why the rest of Australians do not enjoy this skill. I have to say that there's also an alarming problem that comes with that, and I'm not sure how much it is correlated with this super sight. It might be also correlated to other factors such as scarce hygiene or diabetes, and it is the fact that they have a likelihood 6 times higher to lose their sight once they get to the age of 40, which is like a kind of a paradox. You enjoy for 40 years this beautiful eyesight that allows you to watch and look at everything with so much precision and clearness, and then you lose it. But anyway, that is one good superpower. Let's move on. Second population we are going to talk about is Sherpa. Some of you guys may have heard of Sherpa, some of you may have not, so let's talk about them. They are Nepalese indigenous tribes. They have lived on the Himalayas for the last 6,000 years. So what you want, like something has to come out of that. And the skill that they have is incredibly powerful, and that is to produce more hemoglobin. And what that means is that simply they are, so to speak simply, but they are way more able than we are to manage their reservoir of oxygen, which this seems to me environmentally derived, meaning, of course, being that they reside all the time on the Himalayas, and they are the guides and helpers for all the alpinists that do climb Himalayas, then naturally they must have survived. And in order to do that, they have developed that kind of skill that allows you to produce more hemoglobin, manage better your oxygen, and what that means is that your body outside of that condition can enjoy way more oxygen. Now, I don't know if, you pick a Sherpa and you pick someone of the Sherpa and you throw it in the city, how that will react. If smog and pollution will compromise his natural abilities or not. That would be like a quite interesting experiment. And then you have to deal with probably the stress that derives from living in a city, for somebody who's not used to it. But, I would like to try at least for a couple of days and see if that abilities in different contexts gets lost, or remains there. But interesting. So that was number 2, Sherpa. Let's go to number 3, Bajau Laut. So they are a population from Malaysia, indigenous population. The legend goes that they were a kingdom, like a small kingdom. At a certain point in time, the daughter of the king gets lost. So the king calls all of them up and says, guys, let's find my daughter. But the daughter was never found. And so the Bajau Laut decided that their best option was to remain into the sea and not to ever come back to land. And the reason why that legend exists is not necessarily because that is a true story, I don't know, it could be, it's a legend, but the reason why that exists is because they have an incredible skill, and that is to be able to remain in apnea for 13 minutes. Now, that is fascinating, incredible, extremely powerful, and also mind-blowing. Why? They have a larger spleen, a spleen that is basically a half bigger than mine, than yours, etc. Assuming that mine and yours have same dimensions, and what that means is like regular, normal dimensions, to my knowledge anyway. But they have a larger spleen, and what that does is that basically allows them to remain in waters in apnea, that's more precise, in apnea for up to 13 minutes. Of course, that allows them to, survive that way. Their main activity is fishing, and there should be no surprise there. But like 13 minutes is like a lot of time. It's not just a joke. And the thing is, like, they have a larger spleen, right? So again, we're talking about skills that have developed over the course of time, you have to imagine, over the course of probably many centuries, evolutionarily, because there's no other explanation why, certain people would have a certain spleen with certain dimensions and why the rest of the population will not have that. Of course, that is something that cannot be inherited from other people, because probably it's like a sort of secluded tribe, meaning they don't mix with foreigners and they're not super integrated with the rest of society, so that doesn't impact the rest of the world or the rest of the population of Malaysia. But amazing, and then again, now you do see that there's a organ that has been modified because of that, right? So for the Sherpa, you cannot argue that because you don't really see anything different besides more production of hemoglobin. So you kind of wonder, like, will that get lost? If you throw a Sherpa in the city, if you throw him, somewhere in a different environment, will he or she lose their ability? But here you have a 50% larger spleen, which I thought was fascinating. That's all. Alright, let's move on. Let's go to a different population. This time around, we are in Kenya. Okay, so you guys know that whoever wins the marathon is probably someone from Kenya. Now, there's a reason, and the reason is not Kenya. The reason is a particular tribe that has the name of Kalenjin. Now, Kalenjin have found, and these people that have researched all of this is University of Copenhagen, so Denmark. Apparently, they got interested in superpowers of different populations, and they have done a lot of research on, super abilities, superpowers that people might have. But anyway, so this tribe, Kalenjin, we don't see many radical or drastic changes compared to an average person of a different population. We see only basically two factors here. One is that they have very long limbs, especially, this must not be generalized, they have long legs, long and thin legs. That's number one. You could also argue though that if they run and if they run constantly, then you kind of acquire that physical structure, right? So the fact that they have it, that they have inherit a certain structure might help them, but then you also have to train and exercise in order to get into a certain shape that is functionally useful for the sport that you want to practice, in this case, marathon. So there's that. But they also have very small calves and very small ankles. And what that does is distributing energy better. Apparently, if you have a large calf, you're not distributing, or large calves, you're not distributing your energy properly or as well as somebody who has those qualities. So those are the two factors that they have found out, which to me, it looked like, oh, that's not a big deal, right? But very little, very minute and minuscule changes like that can produce a huge difference in results. Finally, this tribe might be just better at running and running long distances because of two other factors. One, it's diet that is rich in amide, and number two might be the altitude they live in, which is perfect for adjusting the body and regulating the amount of oxygen, so then you can go and run, and have a better control of the oxygen, and so a better control of your respiration and better control on your movements, and so winning. Now let's move on. Different population. We are in Bolivia this time around, and we are with the Tsimane people. Now, Tsimane people have the lowest rate of cardiac diseases. So here it has everything to do most likely with the diet. There are two researchers here that we do need to mention. One, super famous, Walter Longo, Italian. He moved probably a long time ago in California, in the US. He's a researcher there for the University of Southern California, and he has published a book that has become hugely popular on longevity. So if you have heard his name, it's probably because of that book. And in that book, he describes like a diet that is probably that of rats. Like you're supposed to eat as little as possible, and that's a good point to make, because a lot of times we just need because we like eating, not necessarily because we treat food as our nourishment for our body. And there's nothing wrong with eating, food that we like. I would think that I would not eat if I didn't like the food, that I'm eating, probably. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But food is nourishment, right? And so exceeding with certain types of food can create a whole host of problems. We're not going to discuss that. However, we're just going to stick to the Tsimane. They have a very specific diet, which is 72% of carbs, 14% of fats, 14% of proteins. Apparently, that is the magical combination how to have clear arteries. And what that does is basically you live longer. You don't get, of course, that is if you don't smoke or do other activities that can compromise that. And of course, sometimes your genes are predominant over whatever kind of diet you have. But in general, this should work. This type of combination, 72, 14, and 14%, allows you to have clear arteries. So no heart attacks, no strokes. Clear arteries, not cardiac diseases. And that's pretty good. And then last point. So the last population we are going to talk about today is actually a population in Ecuador. Now, we're talking specifically about them because we cannot extend the research and the results of that research to other populations. But there is a syndrome called Laron syndrome, and that causes basically a insensitivity to growth hormone, which means, in other words, that people remain of a very short stature. Now, specifically, Laron syndrome has been diagnosed in a group that descends from Sephardi Jews, and this group, of course, has spread. So there are some concentrations of these people like everywhere around the world, but Laron syndrome takes the name of Xavier Laron, who was a doctor in Israel that diagnosed the syndrome that caused short stature and so short height. And of the people suffering from Laron syndrome, there's a specific group that resides in Ecuador. And according to Jaime Guevara Aguirre, what they have, which we don't have, is a superpower. That is, they do not suffer from cancer or diabetes. In other words, there is something connected, entrenched, deeply and rooted in the fact of having Laron syndrome that forbids you, prevents you from having diabetes or cancer. And so that is an interesting path to discover and to investigate. Because of course, if we know that, we might be able to find a cure that can be extended to people suffering from diabetes and cancer, and that would be beautiful. But they do not suffer from cancer or diabetes. So there's something there to be investigated and hopefully to be found out in a way that is productive to other people. Now, guys, this was our last superpower. So with that being said, we're done for the day. Of course, comment below, let us know your thoughts, let us know what you think, and we'll talk some more next time. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel, and if you want, you can also hit the notification bell so you can receive every new update. We're gonna talk next time. Bye!